Jake Morrison held the controls of his ship tight as red warning lights flashed all around him. The space transport called Horizon's Edge was falling fast toward the desert planet below. He could hear strange sounds coming from the engine room, and smoke was filling the air. Jake knew he had to land the ship soon or everyone would die. Behind him sat 3 alien passengers who were making worried noises. Ambassador Krell was a tall blue creature with slits on his neck that needed water to breathe. Vex looked like a walking crystal that glowed with inner light. Navigator Zane had 8 long arms like a spider and moved very carefully. Jake pushed buttons and pulled levers trying to save the ship. The planet below was covered in red sand and tall rocks. There were no cities or green areas anywhere. Just endless desert that stretched to the horizon. The ship shook harder as they got closer to the ground. Ambassador Krell spoke in a wet voice that sounded like he was drowning. Captain Morrison, our chances of survival on this world are very low. The heat readings show temperatures that will kill us in hours. Dr. Vex's crystal body flashed bright red, which meant he was scared. My scans show no water sources visible from orbit. This is what humans call a death world. Navigator Zane clicked his mouth parts together, making sharp sounds. Perhaps we should try to reach the next system even if the engines fail completely. Jake shook his head and kept working on the landing. Too late for that. We're going down whether we like it or not. Hold on tight, everyone. The ship hit the sand with a loud crash that threw everyone forward. Metal pieces flew around the cabin and sparks shot from broken wires. Jake felt pain in his shoulder, but he was alive. The ship slid across the sand for a long way before it finally stopped next to some big rocks. Smoke filled the air, and Jake could smell burning plastic. He unbuckled his safety belt and stood up slowly. His head hurt, but nothing seemed broken. Behind him, the 3 aliens were making different sounds of pain and fear. Everyone alive back there? Jake called out as he checked the control panel. Most of the lights were red or not working at all. Ambassador Krell was breathing very fast through his neck slits. I am functional, but my breathing apparatus requires moisture. How long before rescue arrives? Jake looked at the communication system and saw that it was completely dead. No lights, no sounds, nothing. The emergency beacon was also broken. Pieces of it were scattered on the floor. Bad news, Jake said, turning around to face his passengers. Communications are down. Emergency beacon is busted. Nobody knows where we are. Dr. Vex's crystal body dimmed to a pale blue. Then we will die here. My species cannot survive in such heat without proper cooling systems. Navigator Zane wrapped his 8 arms around himself like he was trying to hide. The environmental suits have only 6 hours of power remaining. After that we will be exposed to the planetary conditions. Jake walked to the supply closet and started counting their resources. They had some emergency food bars, a few tools, and 3 containers of drinking water. The water recycling system was broken and leaking fluid on the floor. We have water. For maybe 2 days if we're careful, Jake announced. The recycling system is dead, so that's all we get. Ambassador Krell made a gasping sound. 2 days? In this heat, we will need much more water than normal. My breathing system alone requires constant moisture. Jake looked out the cracked window at the desert landscape. The sun was bright yellow and cast sharp shadows behind the red rocks. He could see heat waves rising from the sand. In the distance were some green shapes that looked like large plants. What are those green things out there? Jake asked, pointing through the window. Dr. Vex moved closer to look. His crystal face could change shape to focus like a telescope. They appeared to be barrel cacti. Large succulent plants adapted to desert environments. Are they dangerous? Jake wanted to know. Navigator Zane clicked his mouth parts. Our database shows that most cactus species contain toxic alkaloids. They are poisonous to most known life forms. Jake nodded and kept looking at the plants. They were big and round, with thick spines covering their surface. He had seen pictures of similar plants in books about Earth's deserts. Ambassador Krell was getting worse. His blue skin was starting to turn pale, and his breathing was becoming more difficult. Captain Morrison, I do not think I will survive until rescue arrives. My species requires humid environments. Dr. Vex was also showing signs of stress. Cracks was starting to appear in his crystal structure. The temperature fluctuations are causing thermal expansion in my matrix. I am beginning to fracture. Navigator Zane had pulled all 8 arms close to his body and was shaking. My circulation system is failing. Desert conditions are incompatible with arachnoid physiology. Jake felt sorry for his passengers, but he also felt something else. He felt determined. Humans had survived in deserts before. His grandfather had told him stories about soldiers who lived for weeks in the desert with almost no water. "Look," Jake said in a calm voice. "I know this looks bad, but humans have survived worse. We're going to figure this out." He gathered some tools from the emergency kit, including a metal rod, a knife, and some pieces of cloth. The aliens watched him with confusion as he headed toward the exit. "Where are you going?" Dr. Vex asked with worry in his crystal voice. Jake smiled and opened the door. Hot air rushed into the ship like opening an oven. "I'm going to get us some water." Ambassador Krell made a choking sound. "Captain Morrison, there is no water visible anywhere. The landscape scans show only sand and rock." Jake pointed at the barrel cacti in the distance. "Those plants didn't grow here without water. They must be storing it somehow." Navigator Zane's 8 eyes looked at Jake like he was crazy. "But the toxic alkaloids will kill you if you consume the plant fluids." Jake picked up the metal rod and tested its weight. "Maybe they'll kill you, but humans are pretty tough. We've been eating things that kill other species for thousands of years." He stepped out into the burning heat of the desert sun. The sand was so hot he could feel it through his boots. Behind him, the 3 aliens watched from the safety of the crashed ship as Jake walked toward the nearest cactus. The desert was silent, except for the sound of wind blowing sand against rocks. Jake felt sweat start to form on his skin, but he kept walking. He was going to save his passengers, even if it meant doing something that seemed impossible to them. Jake walked across the hot sand toward the largest barrel cactus he could see. The sun beat down on his shoulders and he could feel sweat running down his back. Behind him, the 3 aliens watched from inside the crashed ship. They thought he was walking to his death. The cactus was bigger than Jake had expected. It stood almost as tall as he was and twice as wide. Thick spines covered the green surface like needles. Jake pulled out his metal rod and studied the plant carefully. He remembered reading about desert survival when he was younger. Ambassador Krell's voice came through the ship's external speaker. "Captain Morrison, please return to the ship. Our scanners show that plant contains lethal toxins." Jake ignored the warning and used his metal rod to carefully knock away some of the spines. The cactus had thick green skin underneath the needles. He could see moisture beading on the surface where he had damaged it. Dr. Vex's crystal voice crackled through the speaker. "Human Jake, the chemical analysis confirms the presence of alkaloid compounds. These substances will cause organ failure in most species." Jake smiled and kept working. He used the sharp end of his metal rod to cut into the thick skin of the cactus. Green juice started to leak out and drip onto the sand. The liquid looked thick and cloudy, but Jake could smell water in it. "Your scanners might be right about the toxins," Jake called back to the ship, "but human digestive systems are different from yours. We evolved eating all kinds of things that would poison other animals." Navigator Zane clicked his mouth parts nervously. "This is highly irregular behavior. No intelligent species would consume known toxins voluntarily." Jake cut deeper into the cactus and more juice flowed out. He carved out a large chunk of the inside flesh, which was white and pulpy. It looked like the inside of a watermelon, but with a different texture. He took off his shirt and spread it on a flat rock. Then he placed the cactus flesh on the shirt and started pressing it with another rock. The pulp squeezed through the fabric and clear liquid dripped into a metal container he had brought from the ship. "Ambassador," Krell made worried sounds through his breathing slits. "Captain Morrison, what you are attempting defies basic biological survival principles." Jake kept pressing the cactus pulp. More liquid squeezed out and filled his container. After several minutes of work, he had collected almost a full liter of cloudy water. It smelled strange, but it was definitely water. Survival principles are different for different species, Jake replied. He held up the container and looked at the liquid inside. It was not perfectly clear, but it looked drinkable. Dr. Vex's crystal body flashed red with alarm. Please do not consume that substance. Our analysis shows it contains compounds that would cause immediate poisoning in crystalline physiology. Jake lifted the container to his lips and took a small sip. The water tasted bitter and slightly salty, but it was not terrible. His stomach felt fine and he did not feel sick. He took a longer drink and smiled. Tastes like survival, Jake announced. He felt the liquid cooling his throat and giving his body the moisture it needed. The bitter taste was something he could handle. Navigator Zane made clicking sounds of disbelief. The human has consumed poison and shows no adverse effects. This contradicts everything in our biological databases. Jake took another drink and felt better. The water was working. His body was processing the liquid and filtering out anything harmful. Humans had been doing this for millions of years on Earth. My species has always been good at eating things that kill other creatures, Jake explained as he worked on extracting more water. We ate toxic plants, drank from dirty rivers, and survived in places where nothing else could live. Ambassador Krell's voice was getting weaker as his condition worsened. But the alkaloid levels should cause neural disruption in any known life form. Jake pressed more cactus pulp and collected another half-liter of water. Maybe in your life forms, but humans are different. Our livers and kidneys are really good at cleaning bad stuff out of our blood. He walked back toward the ship carrying the container of cactus water. The aliens inside looked at him like he was some kind of impossible creature. To them, what Jake had just done was like watching someone drink acid and ask for more. Dr. Vex ran more scans as Jake approached. The readings confirm that you have consumed significant quantities of toxic alkaloids, yet your biosigns remain stable. This should not be possible. Jake entered the ship and offered the container to his passengers. All three aliens backed away from the water like it was radioactive waste. It's safe, Jake promised. Well, safe for me anyway. I don't know about you guys. Navigator Zane wrapped his 8 arms tighter around his body. We cannot consume what you have created. Our physiology would shut down immediately upon contact with those toxins. Jake sat down and took another drink. The bitter taste was growing on him and he could feel his energy returning. That's okay. I'll drink the cactus water and save our regular water for you three. Ambassador Krell made a gasping sound. But Captain Morrison, you cannot survive on toxic plant extracts indefinitely. Jake looked around at his alien passengers. They were all getting worse. Ambassador Krell's blue skin was turning gray and his breathing was becoming more labored. Dr. Vex had more cracks appearing in his crystal structure. Navigator Zane was trembling and could barely move his 8 arms. Look, Jake said gently. I know this seems crazy to you, but humans have survived in Earth's deserts for thousands of years. We know how to find water where other species see only death. Dr. Vex's voice was getting weaker. Earth must be a very hostile planet to produce a species with such extreme survival adaptations. Jake laughed and took another sip of cactus water. You have no idea. Earth has deserts, ice ages, volcanoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, and about 1 million different ways to kill you. Humans learn to survive all of it. He stood up and looked out at the desert landscape. There were more cacti visible in different directions. Some were smaller and some were larger. Jake was already planning his next water collection trip. Navigator Zane's 8 eyes focused on Jake with something like amazement. Your species survived conditions that would eliminate most known life forms, not just survived, Jake corrected. We thrived. Humans spread across every continent on Earth. We lived in frozen wastelands, burning deserts, poisonous swamps, and high mountains where the air is too thin to breathe. Ambassador Krell tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. Wonder your species was able to develop space travel. You had to become extremely adaptable just to survive your homeworld. Jake finished his container of cactus water and felt much better. His body was hydrated and functioning normally. The aliens watched him with growing respect and confusion. "The thing about humans," Jake said as he prepared to go back outside, "is that we don't accept death easily. When other species would give up, we find a way to keep going." He picked up his tools and headed for the door. "I'm going to collect more water and see what else I can find out there. You three rest and try to stay cool." As Jake walked back into the desert heat, the three aliens discussed what they had witnessed. None of their science could explain how a human could consume lethal toxins and not only survive but actually gain strength from the experience. Dr. Vex spoke in a quiet, crystal voice. "Perhaps we have underestimated this species. Their survival capabilities appear to exceed anything in our databases." Ambassador Krell nodded weakly. "The galactic community may need to revise its assessment of human potential." Navigator Zane watched Jake walking toward another cactus in the distance. "If this is normal for humans, then they may be the most formidable survivors in known space." The second day in the desert began with Jake feeling stronger while his three alien passengers grew weaker. Ambassador Krell could barely speak through his dried breathing slits. Dr. Vex had developed deep cracks across his crystal body. Navigator Zane had curled all 8 arms around himself and barely moved. Jake had collected more cactus water during the night when the temperature was cooler. He had found 3 different types of cacti and discovered that each one produced slightly different tasting water. Some was more bitter, some was saltier, but all of it kept him alive and healthy. "We need to get rescued soon," Jake announced as he checked on his passengers. "You 3 can't last much longer in this heat." Dr. Vex's crystal voice was barely audible. "Our emergency beacon is destroyed. How do you propose to signal for rescue?" Jake walked to the front of the ship where the damaged control panel sparked occasionally. Most of the systems were dead, but he noticed something interesting. The solar panels on the ship's roof were still intact. They had been designed to charge the ship's batteries during planetary stops. "The solar panels still work," Jake said thoughtfully. "If I can connect them to some of the smaller systems, maybe I can build a distress signal." Ambassador Krell wheezed through his breathing apparatus. "The navigation computer requires too much power. Even with solar input, you cannot generate enough energy." Jake smiled and started pulling apart pieces of broken equipment. "I don't need the whole navigation computer. Just the transmitter circuits and maybe some of the signal processing chips." Navigator Zane uncurled one arm to point at Jake. "You're proposing to rebuild complex electronic systems without proper tools or facilities. Humans are good at fixing things," Jake replied as he sorted through useful components. "We've been taking apart machines and putting them back together in new ways for centuries." He spent the morning dismantling parts of the ship's systems. The aliens watched in fascination as Jake identified which circuits could be salvaged and which connections could be rerouted. His hands moved quickly and confidently as he worked. Dr. Vex managed to focus his crystal vision on Jake's work. "Your understanding of electronic systems is quite advanced for a transport pilot." Jake grinned as he spliced 2 wires together. "I grew up on a farm. When your nearest repair shop is 300 miles away, you learn to fix everything yourself." By midday, the heat had become unbearable. Jake had rigged a temporary shelter using pieces of the ship's hull and some emergency blankets. The shade provided relief for the aliens, but Jake seemed comfortable working in temperatures that would kill most species. "How do you function in such extreme heat?" Ambassador Krell asked weakly. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and kept working on his electronic project. "Humans evolved in Africa where temperatures get this hot regularly. Our bodies are designed to cool themselves through sweating." Navigator Zane observed the water droplets forming on Jake's skin. "Your species loses precious water through your cooling system. This seems inefficient." "Maybe," Jake agreed, "but it lets us stay active when other species have to hide or sleep. Humans can work all day in heat that would shut down most other life forms." As Jake worked on his improvised beacon, he noticed something else about the desert. There were small tracks in the sand near some rocks. The tracks looked like they belonged to lizards or small mammals. Animals, Jake said, pointing at the tracks. If there are animals living here, they must have found water sources. Dr. Vex tried to scan the area, but his systems were failing. The tracks could belong to creatures that get all their moisture from food. Jake shook his head and studied the tracks more carefully. These tracks lead somewhere specific. Animals don't waste energy wandering randomly in the desert. They're going to water. He followed the tracks away from the ship toward a cluster of large rocks. The aliens called after him, but Jake was already exploring. The tracks led to a narrow opening between two big stones. Inside the rocky area, Jake found something amazing. There was a small cave system where moisture collected from underground sources. Water dripped slowly from the cave, sealing into natural pools carved in the rock. "Found water!" Jake called back to the ship. His voice echoed off the cave walls. Ambassador Krell's response was barely audible. "Are you certain it is safe for consumption?" Jake knelt by one of the pools and cupped some water in his hands. It was clear and cool and tasted much better than the cactus water. He drank deeply and felt refreshed. "It's good water," Jake announced. "Much better than what I've been getting from the plants." He used containers from the ship to collect several liters of the cave water. The underground source seemed steady and reliable. Jake realized they now had enough water to survive for weeks if necessary. When Jake returned to the ship, he found his 3 passengers in worse condition than before. The heat was killing them slowly, despite his efforts to keep them cool and hydrated. "I have to get that beacon working," Jake said with determination. "You guys won't last much longer." He worked through the afternoon connecting solar panels to his improvised transmitter. The electronic circuits were delicate and required careful handling. Jake's steady hands and patient approach gradually brought the system together. Dr. Vex watched with his remaining energy. The probability of success with salvaged components is extremely low. Jake continued soldering connections with a small torch he had made from ship components. Probability doesn't matter when you don't have other options. Sometimes you just have to try and see what happens. Navigator Zane's 8 eyes followed Jake's work. "Your species seems to attempt impossible tasks with confidence." "Impossible is just another word for difficult," Jake replied. "Humans have been doing impossible things since we learned to make fire and hunt animals twice our size." As the sun began to set, Jake completed his beacon assembly. The device looked rough and improvised, but all the connections were solid. He carried it outside and positioned it to receive maximum solar charging. "Will it work?" Ambassador Krell asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Jake connected the final power cable and watched as indicator lights began to glow. The beacon started transmitting a basic distress signal that would repeat every few minutes. "It's working," Jake announced with satisfaction. "Range is limited, but any ship passing through this system should pick up the signal." Dr. Vex's crystal body flickered weakly. How long before rescue might arrive? Jake looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Could be hours, could be days. Depends on ship traffic in this area. He turned back to his alien passengers who were all near the end of their endurance. "But don't worry, I'll keep you alive until help arrives. Humans don't abandon their friends." Navigator Zane managed to move one arm in what might have been a gesture of gratitude. "Your species' loyalty is remarkable." Jake smiled and went back to work improving their shelter and water collection systems. The desert night would be cold, but he was prepared for that too. Humans had survived worse conditions with less equipment. As darkness fell across the red desert, Jake's improvised beacon sent its signal into space. Somewhere out there, hopefully, someone would hear the call for help and come to rescue for stranded travelers. Jake settled in for another night of survival, confident that he could keep his alien friends alive until rescue arrived. The desert might be hostile to other species, but humans had been conquering hostile environments for millions of years. He looked up at the alien stars and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Jake was ready for whatever the desert might throw at him. By the 4th day in the desert, Jake had transformed their crash site into something that looked almost comfortable. He had built better shade structures using ship parts and rocks. Water collection systems gathered moisture from multiple sources. He had even managed to catch some of the small desert animals for food. The three alien passengers were barely alive, but they were stable. Jake had been giving them small amounts of the pure cave water and keeping them cool during the hottest parts of the day. Their conditions had stopped getting worse even though they could not recover in the harsh environment. Ambassador Krell lay motionless, but his breathing slits still moved slowly. Dr. Vex's crystal body was covered in cracks, but his inner light still glowed faintly. Navigator Zane had not moved his 8 arms in 2 days, but his eyes still tracked Jake's movements around the camp. Jake was checking his improvised beacon when Dr. Vex suddenly spoke in a weak crystal voice. "Captain Morrison, I must share an observation that disturbs me greatly." Jake looked up from his electronic work. "What's wrong? Are you feeling worse?" Dr. Vex's fractured face focused on Jake with difficulty. "Not worse, confused. According to our biological databases, what you have accomplished should be impossible." Ambassador Krell managed to whisper through his dried breathing apparatus. "Dr. Vex is correct. The survival capabilities you have demonstrated exceed anything in our scientific records." Jake continued working on the beacon while listening to his passengers. "What do you mean impossible? I'm just doing what humans do." Navigator Zane used his remaining strength to access the ship's computer systems. His 8 arms moved slowly across the interface as he called up files from the Galactic database. "Captain Morrison," Zane said carefully, "our records contain biological data on over 3,000 different species. None of them exhibit the combination of traits that you have displayed." Jake paused in his work and looked at the 3 aliens. They were all staring at him with expressions he could not quite understand. Dr. Vex continued the explanation. "Every known species in the galaxy has specialized evolutionary adaptations. We crystalline beings are extremely durable, but we cannot adapt quickly to new environments." Ambassador Krell added his own species to the comparison. "Zephyrians like myself possess advanced intellectual capabilities, but our bodies are fragile and require specific environmental conditions." Navigator Zane clicked his mouthparts weakly. "The Arachnoid Federation has superior reflexes and coordination, but very limited tolerance for environmental extremes." Jake was beginning to understand what they were trying to tell him. "So each species is good at some things, but not others?" "Exactly," Dr. Vex confirmed. "Biological evolution requires trade-offs. A species cannot be highly intelligent and physically durable and environmentally adaptable all at the same time." Ambassador Krell's voice was barely audible. "Yet humans appear to possess all of these traits simultaneously. This should not be possible according to known evolutionary principles." Navigator Zane pulled up more data on his screen. "The chemical tolerance you have demonstrated by consuming cactus toxins would require specialized liver and kidney adaptations. The temperature resistance you show in this heat requires advanced thermal regulation systems." Dr. Vex's crystal vision focused on Jake's sweat-covered skin. "Your cooling mechanism alone represents a remarkable biological solution that most species never developed." Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and thought about what they were saying. "So you're telling me that humans are weird?" "Not weird," Ambassador Krell whispered. "Extraordinary. Your species combines survival traits that our science believed could not exist together in nature." Navigator Zane scrolled through more database entries. Intelligence, adaptability, toxin resistance, temperature tolerance, tool-making ability, problem-solving skills, and social cooperation. No known species rates high in all these categories. Jake looked around at his improvised desert camp. Water collectors, shade structures, food traps, electronic beacon, comfortable sleeping areas. He had built all of this in 4 days using only crashed ship parts and natural materials. "Maybe humans are just really stubborn," Jake suggested with a smile. "When we can't do something the easy way, we find a hard way that works." Dr. Vex made a sound that might have been crystal laughter. "Stubbornness itself is a survival trait. Most species accept environmental limitations. Humans apparently refuse to accept them." Ambassador Krell managed to turn his head slightly to look at Jake. Our preliminary assessment classified humans as a developing species with average capabilities. This evaluation appears to have been completely wrong. Navigator Zane pulled up official galactic records on his screen. The standard classification system rates species on intelligence, physical capability, adaptability, and survival potential. Humans scored average in all categories. Jake cleaned sand out of a water collection device while listening. Maybe. Your tests don't measure the right things. What do you mean? Dr. Vex asked with genuine curiosity. Jake thought about how to explain human nature to alien minds. Your tests probably measured how well humans perform in controlled conditions. But humans are at their best when everything goes wrong. Ambassador. Krell made a wheezing sound that might have been agreement. Crisis situations reveal true capabilities. Exactly, Jake said. Humans evolved dealing with constant crises. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, predators, diseases, natural disasters. We got good at surviving when everything was trying to kill us. Navigator Zane accessed more historical data. Your planet Earth appears to have been extremely hostile during human evolution. Multiple extinction events, climate changes, and environmental challenges. Jake nodded as he adjusted his shade screen. Earth wasn't a nice place to evolve. Most of the time it was actively trying to wipe out every living thing. Humans learned to survive anyway. Dr. Vex's crystal voice carried wonder. So your species developed extreme adaptability because your environment demanded it. Right, Jake? Agreed. Other species might have evolved on stable planets with consistent conditions. Humans evolved on a world that changed the rules every few thousand years. Ambassador Krell struggled to speak clearly. This explains the biological impossibilities we have observed. Humans evolved to survive impossible situations. Navigator Zane highlighted sections of data on his screen. If this analysis is correct, then humans may be the most naturally equipped survivors in known space. Jake finished his maintenance work and sat down near his passengers. Look, I don't know about all that science stuff. I just know that when things get bad, humans find a way to keep going. Dr. Vex focused his fractured vision on Jake. Captain Morrison, you have demonstrated capabilities that our experts believed were theoretically impossible. You have consumed toxins that should have killed you, survived temperatures that should have caused organ failure, and constructed complex systems from salvaged components. Ambassador Krell added his observation. Furthermore, you have done all of this while maintaining the welfare of 3 dying aliens who could contribute nothing to your survival. Jake looked at his 3 passengers with genuine concern. Of course I'm taking care of you. You're my passengers. Humans don't abandon people who need help. Navigator Zane clicked his mouthparts thoughtfully. Social cooperation at personal cost is another trait that varies greatly among species. Humans appear to rate extremely high in this category as well. Dr. Vex made calculations using his remaining processing power. If Captain Morrison is representative of average human capabilities, then the galactic community has severely underestimated your species. Jake stood up and checked his beacon again. The signal was still transmitting strongly. Maybe we should focus on getting rescued first. You guys can worry about human evolution after we're all safe. Ambassador Krell managed a weak gesture that might have been agreement. Agreed? But Captain Morrison, when we return to civilization, we will be filing reports about what we have witnessed here. What kind of reports? Jake asked. Dr. Vex's crystal voice carried certainty despite his weakened condition. Reports recommending that humanity be reclassified from developing species to apex survivors. Navigator Zane looked up from his data screen. The galactic community needs to understand what humans are truly capable of. Jake smiled and went back to work on their survival systems. Well, just remember to mention that we're friendly apex survivors. We like making friends more than enemies. On the 7th day, Jake was improving his water collection system when he heard a sound that made him stop and listen. It was the distant hum of ship engines approaching from the north. His improvised beacon had finally reached someone. Rescue ship incoming. Jake called to his alien passengers as he ran to the highest rock formation nearby. Ambassador Krell managed to make a weak sound of relief through his breathing apparatus. Dr. Vex's crystal body flickered with what might have been hope. Navigator. Zane moved one of his 8 arms slightly to acknowledge that he had heard. Jake climbed to the top of the rocks and waved his arms at the approaching vessel. It was a medium-sized cargo ship with the markings of an independent trader. The ship circled their crash site twice before finding a suitable landing spot on the flat sand nearby. The rescue ship landed with a cloud of dust and sand. Jake ran down from the rocks toward the new arrival. The main hatch opened and a short, stocky alien climbed out. He had gray skin and 4 arms and looked like he belonged to the Centauran Trader Guild. "You the one sending that distress signal?" The alien Captain Austin accented Galactic Standard. Jake nodded eagerly. "Yes. Captain Jake Morrison of the transport ship Horizon's Edge. We crashed 7 days ago with 3 passengers in critical condition." The Centauran looked around at Jake's improvised survival camp with obvious surprise. Water collectors, shade, structures, food drying racks, and comfortable living areas covered the area around the crashed ship. 7 days? The captain asked with disbelief. "On Zarian 7? That's impossible. This is classified as a death world. Nothing survives here more than a few hours." Jake led the rescue captain toward his ship where the 3 aliens waited. "The passengers are in bad shape, but they're alive. I've been keeping them stable." The Centauran captain stopped walking and stared at Jake. "You kept 3 people alive for 7 days on a death world? What species are you?" "Human," Jake replied. Simply. The captain's 4 eyes widened, and he made rapid notes on a handheld device. "Human, that explains some things. I've heard stories but never met one before." They reached the crashed ship where Jake's 3 passengers lay in the shade. The Centauran captain ran medical scans on each of them and shook his head in amazement. "These 3 should have died within hours of exposure to this environment," the captain said. "How did you keep them alive?" Jake showed the rescue captain his water sources, cooling systems, and food supplies. "Just basic survival techniques. Keep them hydrated, cool, and fed." Ambassador Krell managed to speak in a barely audible whisper. "Captain Morrison accomplished the impossible. He thrived in conditions that nearly killed us in hours." The Centauran captain looked at Jake with growing respect. "You're telling me you not only survived, but actually set up a functioning camp on Zarian 7? Dr. Vex's crystal voice crackled weakly. "Captain Morrison consumed toxic plant alkaloids, survived extreme temperatures, and built complex systems from salvaged parts. His capabilities exceed our scientific understanding." Navigator Zane moved one arm to point at Jake. "This human represents survival abilities that our databases classified as theoretically impossible." The rescue captain made more notes on his device. "This is going to cause quite a stir in the galactic community. Humans surviving on death worlds isn't something that happens every day." Jake helped load his 3 passengers onto the rescue ship's medical beds. The ship's automatic systems immediately began treating their dehydration and environmental exposure. "Will they be okay?" Jake asked with genuine concern. The Centauran captain checked his medical readings. "They'll recover fully once we get them to a proper medical facility. Thanks to your care, they avoided permanent damage." As the rescue ship lifted off from the desert planet, Jake looked down at his survival camp shrinking below them. 7 days that had changed everything for his alien passengers and maybe for humanity's reputation in the galaxy. Ambassador Krell was conscious enough to speak into the ship's communication system. "I am filing an immediate report with the Galactic Council. Humanity requires reclassification based on observed capabilities." Dr. Vex added his crystal voice to the transmission, confirmed. "Human survival abilities far exceed current database entries. Previous assessments appear to have been completely inadequate." Navigator Zane accessed the ship's communication array with his slowly recovering arms, recommending immediate upgrade of human species classification from developing to Apex survivor status. The Centauran captain listened to these conversations with growing excitement. "Do you realize what this means?" If humans can survive on death worlds, it changes everything about galactic exploration and colonization. Jake was more interested in getting his passengers to medical care than thinking about galactic politics. Let's just focus on getting everyone healthy first. But word was already spreading through galactic communication networks. The story of the human who had survived 7 days on Zarian 7, while keeping 3 aliens alive, became the biggest news story of the year when they reached the nearest space station. Reporters and scientists were waiting. Jake found himself surrounded by beings from dozens of different species, all asking how he had accomplished the impossible. It wasn't impossible, Jake insisted for the 100th time. It was just difficult. Humans are good at handling difficult situations. Ambassador Krell, recovering in the medical bay, gave his official statement to the press. Captain Morrison demonstrated survival capabilities that our science previously considered impossible. His actions on Zarian 7 prove that humanity possesses extraordinary adaptive potential. Dr. Vex, his crystal structure slowly healing, added his analysis. The combination of intelligence, physical resilience, chemical tolerance, and social cooperation displayed by this human suggests that our understanding of biological limitations was incomplete. Navigator Zane, flexing his 8 arms as sensation returned, provided the technical data. Captain Morrison consumed known toxins, survived lethal temperatures, and constructed functional systems from random components. These feats individually would be remarkable. Combined, they indicate a species with unprecedented survival capabilities. The galactic news networks carried the story across known space. Humanity went from being considered a minor developing species to being recognized as possibly the most naturally equipped survivors in the galaxy. Jake sat in the station's restaurant, eating a normal meal and watching the news coverage with amusement. A reporter approached his table and asked for another interview. Captain Morrison, how does it feel to be called a miracle of evolution? Jake finished his sandwich and smiled. Look, I appreciate the attention, but I just did what any human would do. We see a problem, we solve it. We find ourselves in trouble, we figure a way out. But the biological impossibilities you overcame. Jake laughed and took a drink of his coffee. Where I come from, impossible is just another word for Tuesday. Humans have been proving the universe wrong about what's possible since we first figured out how to make fire. The reporter pressed for more details. But surely you understand the significance of what you accomplished. Jake looked around the busy space station at dozens of alien species going about their daily lives. The only thing that matters is that my passengers are safe and healthy. Everything else is just paperwork. But the paperwork was changing everything. Humanity's official classification was upgraded overnight. Planets previously considered too dangerous for colonization were suddenly being evaluated for human settlement. The galactic community began to understand that they had seriously underestimated Earth's children. Ambassador Krell, now fully recovered, filed his final report. Humanity should be reclassified as an apex survivor species with unprecedented adaptive capabilities. Their potential contributions to galactic civilization may be far greater than originally assessed. Dr. Vex submitted his scientific analysis. Human biology appears to represent a unique evolutionary solution to environmental hostility. Their survival mechanisms deserve extensive study. Navigator Zane provided the technical evaluation. Human problem-solving abilities and technological adaptation exceed standard parameters. They may be the most versatile survivors in known space. The desert planet Zarian 7 was eventually designated as a human training facility, though most other species continued to consider it uninhabitable. For humans, it became just another challenge to overcome. Jake returned to his job as a transport pilot, but now he carried passengers who looked at him with a mixture of respect and amazement. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy not through conquest or politics, but through the simple human refusal to give up when things got tough. In cantinas and trading posts across known space, the story of the human who had turned a death world into a survival camp became legend. Other species began to understand that when humans said something was possible, It usually meant they had already figured out how to do it. Jake never considered himself a hero. He had just done what humans always did when faced with the impossible. He had found a way to survive and helped others do the same for humanity. It was just another Tuesday in a universe full of challenges waiting to be conquered.